Hey guys, so a quick message before the video plays. YouTube is blatantly censoring me for speaking against the woke mind virus. This is content the performing clowns and woke mind virus slaves don't want you to see. So in order to help me aikido these worthless whores and soy boy freaks, I just ask that you subscribe to help combat the forces of darkness. Because this is a war against those that want humanity to die in darkness and perversion. And only speaking the truth is going to save the world. We got here Elon Musk interviewing United States senators, asking them about what's going on in Ukraine and essentially the corruption and lack of basic cognitive function going on in the government. I have Farzad edit here, which always cuts out about 30% of the silent wait time, which means that you guys will get maximum value per minute here, which is very good. Also, something to keep in mind here is that it is obviously unprecedented for the leading titan of industry, Elon Musk, to do public essentially discourse with government employees, much less to do that on a platform, a stage that he owns himself, that being X. So this is very interesting. 44 minutes, let's get going.
All right, let me pull. Elon is here, Vivek is here. Just want to pull you guys in, see if you have any questions or comments.
David Sachs is here. I think he's a billionaire in the 1 or 2 billions. Venture capital, probably some other stuff. DJ Vance, I mean, he's a senator. We have Vivek here, so smartest person on the debate stage for the Republicans. And I got this pineapple mango juice delivered to me. I'm pretty sure the delivery person from Instacart just threw it in my order to troll me for not giving a very good tip. But so I'm sipping on a very rare cocktail, being pineapple mango juice. I don't normally like this, but I'm sipping it for you guys so I can maintain energy and brain focus for this analysis. It is kind of late at night right now. The things I do for my audience.
Well, what is the rationale given for sending vast sums of money with no accountability to Ukraine? How is it in any way defensible? What is the defense that they say that no, this is why we should not have any accounting of how the money is spent?
Elon's hyper-capable brain is framing things in terms of first principles, and this is really what is interesting to see. I mean, I would especially like to see the unthinking Democrat senators try to answer questions directed from Elon Musk, because it would frame so perfectly how uninterested in reality and objective frameworks they are. They're purely ideological and aren't even interested in coherence. We have traitors in the government that are poking holes in this ship and letting in water on purpose.
Yeah, Elon, it's Judy, and here's the basic argument. It's that we have to rush resources to Ukraine immediately, or they're liable to fall to Russian aggression. And it's all basically an argument made under the gun that unless you approve this appropriation of resources and weapons, then you will allow Russia to win. So it's a kind of moral blackmail. And, every negative story that comes out of Ukraine, every, item of corruption that David and Mike have just pointed to, these things sort of get brushed under the rug. And if you don't support this, then you want Vladimir Putin to win. And that's the moral framing here. So the
moral framing, not the coherent framing. Notice he said the moral framing. Also, this is a Republican senator feels some sort of obligation to use logic and reason and rationality. I'd really like to see an unthinking leftist try to answer these questions.
The argument that you sometimes hear folks make, Elon, is that the money has been entirely well accounted for. And even some of our Senate Republican colleagues in private and meetings with the Biden administration senior officials will say, well, this has been the most properly accounted for money in the history of any American country.
I'd be very curious to hear what those meetings actually sound like in person, to hear someone say those words. But what we can't ignore is that there is an invisible, unspoken rule, which is we cannot go against the radical left-wing ideology of radical, unthinking, unscrupulous policy in the guise of compassion and inclusivity. That's what this is here. And we're seeing the ideology of degenerate leftism, anti-accountability and individuality is manifesting itself on the scale of losing hundreds of billions of dollars. They are, in a sense, too mentally handicapped by the ideology of the left to stop sending money by the tens of billions of dollars to a country that isn't even a part of the UN.
It doesn't even pass the smell test, and they'll admit to you that it's a complete lie when you push them on it, but it becomes this sort of sunk cost fallacy where the
unspoken lie
guys can't admit that there is corruption. They can't admit that there's no strategy. They can't admit that this isn't going well, because if they admitted that, it would cause too much psychological harm and they'd have to cut bait.
It would undermine their entire propaganda. It would undermine the ideology of the left, which says there's no such thing as coherence. objective reality itself is discriminatory and oppressive. And if we acknowledge that we've lied, then we have to change course. And that's going to require a very painful process where we will either adhere to logical parameters or pay the price in terms of being ridiculed and made fun of by our colleagues and by the public for our incompetence. So this is why the left has a set of, I mean, you'd think that their obligation, that their incentives would be to serve America. But I've said this in the video I released yesterday, what will be yesterday when this video goes out tomorrow. The left in the government is actively working to sabotage America. The incentives are to their incoherent ideology and victimhood Olympics to determine a person's virtue, identity politics, Marxism. It's not to serving America, which is obviously a massive issue.
Well, what about even retroactive examination? You know, if there's an urgency to the money, one can understand, okay, if Ukraine's going to fall apart without sending the money, then there should at least be subsequent accounting and accountability for where the funds are sent and prosecution where there is corruption.
That's where they fall back on the argument that the money's already properly accounted for. It's a bit of a logical whack-a-mole where you say, Mike and I and...
There shouldn't be a logical whack-a-mole. That is like 5th grade stuff. It's like, okay, we just established one premise that we've vetted as logical and coherent. Now we're going to move on to a second topic, but as soon as we do that, you forget that what we just established is true. That is like, I mean, dude, 5th graders learn how to not do that in school, or at least they should. I learned that innately by having super smart parents, but in the branches of Congress, on the left, they aren't able to parse simple conceptual ideas.
Josh Hawley and I have had
Think about that admission that he just made.
Amendments to this effect where you appoint a special investigator general because that similar figure uncovered a ton of corruption that was unknown in Afghanistan. And the argument is you need to actually embolden an independent accountant, to David's point, to go in there and look at the corruption.
You have to embolden an independent accountant because the United States Senate isn't capable of thought.
The response you get then is, well, you don't actually need it because the money's already properly accounted for. I think in reality what's going on is that folks appreciate that if we did have a fulsome inquiry into corruption in Ukraine, it would completely erode what little public will existed. So you're always sort of dealing with what seem to be bad faith arguments, because I think if people dealt with the truth, then the political support for this thing would evaporate.
Say, Elon, this is Senator Ron Johnson. Can I just add a comment here?
So this would obviously indicate that there are some global agendas here, because at a certain point, I mean, I understand that the left does want to bankrupt America, or cripple us economically and do as much damage as possible. But still, if the argument is so low level against not sending money to Ukraine, then you would expect there to be progress. But if there's not progress, that's foot dragging. That isn't just incompetence, that's foot dragging. So people are bought and paid for.
Add a comment here?
Sure.
In terms of accountability, I just read the book from Walter Isaacson, and I was very intrigued by your idiot index. And one of the things I pointed out to my colleagues and didn't have much of an impact. For example, the 155 millimeter shells that Russia can produce, about 4.5 million of them. We're not even up to 1 million a year, okay? They're producing those at $600 a shell, which I would say probably still is a pretty high idiot index. In the U.S. or in the West, it costs us $5,000 to $6,000.
See, this is logic. These are facts. We're using reason to dissect arguments here. Our Congress isn't interested in this. Our Senate isn't interested. The government regime's not interested. The left certainly is not interested. We know that they view facts and logic as abhorrent and oppressive. And this is where I think we should acknowledge the fact that there's probably not going to be any leftists talking to Elon, because they don't want to, it's funny, they don't want to acknowledge that this platform is controlling the world, that the people that talk to Elon control the world, that Elon is a axis for conversation and for attention that even the government must respect. I think the radical left got a taste of this when the BBC tried to act as though they were controlling the interview with Elon, the interview where Elon embarrassed the reporter, and Elon, at a certain point in the interview, responded to the reporter saying, "Do you really think you control the narrative?" And then you saw the expression of the reporter change as he realized that he was being viewed live by hundreds of thousands of people on the platform the billionaire owned, and the BBC wasn't even in control of the interview as they were conducting it. That's the way the radical left is viewing X, and they're enraged that X's numbers are just going up. Everything's going up. User minutes, downloads, everything. It's the #1 app in the world, and there's nothing they can do about it. I'm uploading my videos to X daily. As you can see over here, there's my uploads here. I'll upload this to you guys right now. All right, go check it out, guys. Just posted it. X is the future. Subscribe here and follow me on Twitter.
A shell. So, I mean, I've got more to say, a different perspective, having been to Ukraine a lot, but I just want to add that in terms of accountability. We spend, and you know this, we waste so much money.
If there was a leftist talking here, they'd be saying things like, don't you care about people being attacked? Oh my gosh, we shouldn't be thinking about logic or reason. Let's just bankrupt the country.
In our military-industrial complex, and our colleagues really don't want to dig into it because they're the ones voting for this $880 billion. And so one of the questions I asked too is, well, why?
Dude, $880 billion is like more money than the United States produced in 1970.
What do we get for the $880 billion? And if we're going to spend 60 on Ukraine, can't we spend less somewhere else? And that's just not even on the table.
Bro, do you understand that Dubai was built on a check of like $500 billion? And they have the most modern skyscrapers and architecture pieces and most incredible buildings. Do you know what we could build in the United States for $880 billion? Repair every road in the country. Every single road in the country, including dirt roads, get completely redone. Then we could build stadiums and skyscrapers and incredible pieces of architecture. But no, we have to send it to this random nation. Bro, the people running the country hate us. I'm telling you.
Can I ask a follow-up question about the ammunition issue? What we're talking about here is artillery ammunition.
By the way, if you guys are wondering, the NEOM deal in Saudi Arabia was $500 billion. So look at what they've built. Think of what we could build here.
War in Ukraine it's a war of attrition in which the main weapon is artillery. And one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are losing, really the main reason, is that they're massively outgunned by the Russians. I've seen reports that the
StarCraft mentality right here. Their economy is smaller, they're going to lose.
Russians are expending something
they never talk about. You never hear people talk about in World War II. You hear them talking about the Luftwaffe, the bombs. You got to acknowledge that what wins wars is the economy of infrastructure. How much oil you have, how many workers you have, how many factories you have. The Allies were able to win because they produced like twice as many boats as the enemy.
10,000 artillery shells a day, and the Ukrainians,
Wait, I want to hear that.
they're massively outgunned by the Russians. I've seen reports that the Russians are expending something like 10,000 artillery shells a day,
Wow.
and the Ukrainians have at most about 2,000 shells that they can use per day. This is why the Biden administration sent cluster bombs to Ukraine several months ago, because they said that Ukraine was out of the 155 millimeter artillery ammunition. I guess the Pentagon has been trying to increase production of artillery shells, but we still produce nowhere near enough. I think we've basically increased our production. I've seen reports from about 14,000 a month to about 22,000 a month, which is that's only a 2 or 3 day supply in the Ukraine war. And like you were alluding to, Senator Johnson, the Pentagon, I think they have a goal of 2020 to get production to about 85,000 shells a month. So we're nowhere close to being able to ramp up production to the needs of Ukraine in this war. So I guess my question for you is, even if we do appropriate another 60 billion, we can print more money, but we can't print more artillery shells. That just takes...
Guys, we're literally making ourselves vulnerable here. You understand this? All of this money could have been printed to renovate our military or, God forbid, defend us in a war. You understand that this is money that we're never going to be able to unprint. If we go to war now, let's say with Russia, how much money would we print? If we printed $2 trillion for Ukraine, we would print $50 trillion for us, maybe more. And we're just spending money like it's nothing, but we're devaluing the dollars that give us global dominance. It's very stupid.
Years and years. So
Putin talked about this. Check out my analysis on that as well.
how is this money going to help Ukraine to win a war that, again, they're losing because it's an artillery duel?
First of all,
Even acknowledging that they're losing is intolerable to most of the federal government because they're incompetent and opposed to objective truths that would, not just any objective truth, objective truths in general, objective frameworks, because acknowledging that they exist would invalidate the Marxist ideology that permeates literally 50% of the government.
we all have to understand that Vladimir Putin will not lose this war. I state it that way as opposed to Ukraine can't win. Vladimir Putin will not lose. Losing to Vladimir Putin is existential to Vladimir Putin. Russia has 4 times the population.
This is a really good point. I think Elon just said exactly. I can't tell because this guy sped up the voices.
Vladimir Putin is existential to Vladimir Putin. Russia has 4 times the population. They have a much larger industrial base. Again, I said Russia can produce 4.5 million of those shells a year. We're not even up to 1 million a year.
Exactly. For Ukraine to prevail against Russia, we would literally have to go there ourselves. That is the only possible way, and that's why I'm saying this entire game is ridiculous. We're being led by incompetent people that are not serving logic or reason, but our enemy is. That's why I said in the Putin analysis, it's not praising Vladimir Putin to say he's being logical and reasonable. We need to be logical and reasonable so that we can outcraft him. But our government is incompetent. Our government thinks that objective facts are oppressive. Half of the government can't acknowledge men can't get pregnant.
The average age of a Ukrainian soldier right now is 43 years old. And David, I heard you quote the Time
That's really, really old.
Magazine article. There are other quotes from some of Zelensky's top aides say that even if the U.S. and its allies come through with all the weapons they have pledged, quote, we don't have the men to use them, unquote.
Right. They're literally sending women to the front lines. It's despicable.
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you're worried about the people of Ukraine, you have to understand that probably about 100,000 of their soldiers have been killed. Because there have been about 100,000 Russian conscripts. I take no joy in that. 40,000 civilians. Hundreds of billions of dollars of Ukraine has been destroyed. The only way this war ends is in a settlement. And every day that the war goes on, more Ukrainians, more Russian conscripts die, more civilians die.
Democrats are willing to sacrifice human lives to not validate Vladimir Putin as a global leader who should be bargained with. Because as soon as they say, we will negotiate, they acknowledge that they were wrong, that they were spewing propaganda. And that a leftist is afraid of nothing like being viewed as a fraud, because there's no recourse to that. They can't explain their positions away, they can't explain their incoherence away, because they've demonized mechanisms like logic and reason to begin with.
More of Ukraine gets destroyed, they'll have to be built. So again, sending $60 billion as added fuel.
I will say that at this point, logical parameters are almost just an inconvenience to the left. They almost never think about them. And I'm being completely serious. Objective facts almost never cross the mind of leftists. I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm being dead serious. They never even ask themselves, does this make sense in reality? Is this true? Because the notion of true goes against their ideology.
The flames of a bloody stalemate makes no sense whatsoever. As evil a war criminal as Putin is, he's not going to lose this war. And our colleagues here just aren't willing to accept that reality, and they're living in a fantasy world, think that Ukraine can win this thing. They can't.
David, that's exactly right. I think that is an excellent summary of the situation. When I raised this point, people have, of course, accused me of being some sort of Putin apologist, when in fact my companies have probably done more.
It's pathetic. Again, they only can engage in the political demonization of anyone they disagree with. It's called identity politics. You say something I don't like, I call you a bad person so I can put you in a class of people that I no longer have to listen to because I can't engage with logic or reason to begin with. That's exactly what they do. That's their playbook.
To undermine Russia than anything. I mean, SpaceX has taken away 2/3 of the Russian launch business. The stuff has overwhelmingly helped Ukraine.
Well, I never even thought about that. That's true. SpaceX has taken away business from Russia. They were charging us about $70 million a year, and Elon just wiped him out like that.
I mean, it's such an absurd accusation. My concern is exactly what you articulated. If you have an extended war of attrition, every day that goes by, there are Ukrainian boys that are, and not even boys anymore because they're running out of boys. You're losing, Ukraine's losing people every day. And if you're going to spend lives, it must be for a purpose, and not just, a mile here, a mile there. In fact, a mile back and forth. The lines aren't moving. So just every day, people die.
Right, because warfare has changed. It's not the way... Warfare has permanently changed with artillery. But what I want to say is that to the radical left, again, they don't feel like they need a reason because they never engage in logical analysis. This is why we're playing with people that have divorced themselves from reality. We're not engaging with people who can think here.
For what purpose? And as you said, there is no way in hell that Putin is going to lose. If you would,
they can only demonize any person that disagrees with them. Oh my gosh, you're saying logical things? You must be a Putin supporter. What if we use logic and reason and rationality? Then we could actually beat him. But our Oh my gosh, it's insanity. We're dealing with insane lunatics in our country.
back off, he would be assassinated. And for those who wait, so just every day people die. For what purpose? And as you said, there is no way in hell that Putin is going to lose. If he were to back off, he would be assassinated. And for those who want regime change in Russia,
That's a very interesting thing to say.
you should think about who is the person that could take out Putin. And is that person likely to be a peacenik? Probably not. They're probably going to be even more hardcore than Putin if they
Right.
took him out. So, yeah.
Yes, I
Let
was
me
just going to jump in with one
I assume he's talking about someone from the Kremlin.
just point that leaves off where he landed there, which is I think there's an issue with our framing here. I think most of us here, and it is too bad because I
Right,
think
everyone in the call is using logic and reason and rationality. Get an unthinking leftist in here to bully them, to bludgeon them so the entire country can see how insane the left is.
guy publicly called, and Elon did, and others did. I think JD tried to get somebody in here to articulate the best view of the other side. So hopefully, for as long as we go, that offer remains open. But with that,
Think about the platform right there. Well, a lot of people would give their right arm to have 10 minutes to talk with Elon Musk. Leftist senators are so prideful, they're so arrogant, they're so narcissistic. Oh, we won't acknowledge that Elon Musk is running the entire platform, running the entire show, controlling public opinion, more than we're possibly able to do with all of our mainstream news corporations. Oh my gosh, yeah, I'm not going to go on there and talk with him even though people are dying. Yeah, we're sending women into fighting, but that's okay. Artillery shells, yeah, okay.
being said, I think that the framing, even here amongst those of us who agree on opposing this bill, is a little too charitable, actually, right? Because I think that if there's a good number of Democrats, good number of Republicans who are in favor of more funding to Ukraine, endless funding to Ukraine, but I think those who are generally against it point to what we think of as absence of what we will get from the added investment. Right, that's the argument that goes, okay, the
We've already sent them so much money, it's disgusting.
ROI is lower than the
We could have built 2, maybe 3 Dubais for what we've sent them in terms of cash.
acceptable level of return for U.S. taxpayer dollars, and what are we getting in return for the money we're putting in? I actually think that's the wrong framing. I think it is actually net negative for the United States to continue funding this war, irrespective of the financial cost. For some of the reasons Elon just laid out. First of all, if you are shooting for regime change in Russia, which I do believe is the ideological goal here, the net result you're likely to get is actually one that is far worse than Putin, who's leading Russia.
Why is that the agenda exactly in Russia?
Irrespective of the financial cost. For some of the reasons Elon just laid out. First of all, if you are shooting for regime change in Russia, which I do believe is the ideological goal here.
From the CIA, is that what he's saying? I mean, it doesn't make sense, though, because Putin's winning the war, so that agenda is failing.
The net result you're likely to get is actually one that is far worse than Putin, who's leading Russia. Play that out. And the second result, and the result that you're getting right now in real...
Searching for a new Subaru? The search is over at Subaru of Ontario.
Dude, oh my gosh. Speak of the devil. I talked about this in my last video. Black people featured in car commercials. How many black people are buying Subarus, bro? Let's be honest. Show me the Cadillac. Show me the Escalade. Show me the Mercedes-Benz. Subaru? A black couple? Are you kidding me? DEI is disgusting.
Right now, you can lease a
real time. So regime change, absolutely. I know you're not supposed to say it out loud, but it's worth smoking out. That is the only ultimate stated goal of this project.
Hold on, let me close my window so I don't get inclusive crimed. Never know when a tolerant neighbor will pipe bomb my doorstep.
So you're playing for an outcome that odds are is worse than the one you already have for the United States. But even worse is what you're seeing in the present is a daily strengthening of the military alliance between Russia and China.
Yeah, we're so incompetent, it's disgusting. How is this possible? Leftists are so utterly incompetent, and it's because their ideology is actually triggered and offended by competence. Because competence has to discriminate between better and worse, but all they care about is the discrimination. They're like, oh my gosh, better and worse? You mean I have to be judged? You mean I have to be subservient to something outside of my ideology that reflects an objective reality? This is abhorrent.
When combined, is the single greatest increase for the risk of World War III that we've seen in the post-World War II era, and is a risk that, by definition, then increases the risk of the continued existence of the United States should that world war actually, God forbid, transpire. And I'm not...
Russia and China together are our greatest possible enemy. And simultaneously, we are weakening the dollar, which is what provides us global supremacy. This is not good.
Saying it's likely to happen, any risk or any more than minuscule risk of that happening is an unacceptable risk. And we are actively increasing the risk of that worst case outcome, not just through the loss of financial dollars for ourselves, but irrespective of that financial cost, we are contributing to the increase of that risk versus a diplomatic resolution. I don't think that our position should be getting border security into the bill as a condition. I think we need to force border security and not send money to Ukraine without commingling a compromise on either of those things. But I think the gambit or the play here that would be interesting, and I'd love to hear JD's and Ron's and Mike's reaction to this, is like because you guys have a vote, what, tonight? Is it, JD, or is it tomorrow night?
It's tonight.
Yeah,
It's tonight, right? Yeah. So just in the interest of the super near term, here's a gambit that, I don't favor this as a matter of policy, but I favor this as a matter of negotiation. The play is here, okay, we had this whole discussion about border funding. And what I found so ridiculous about that last border attached bill is they got to name it a border bill when actually there was 3 times more funding going to protecting the border of Ukraine than our own southern border. When in fact, even in our own southern border's case, the real failure is the failure to enforce the existing laws, like Remain in Mexico, which is still the law of the land. I wonder if the following would be an interesting wrench here, and I doubt the other side would go for it, but it'd be interesting to smoke out what the intentions are, what the deliberate nature of all of this is. It's to say, okay, here's the border deal.
We can beat them if our entire side is made up of thinkers who care about reality, because then it's just a bunch of mentally handicapped, outraged people versus intellectual titans. That's what we need. We need people like Vivek in government. If only we could clone this guy.
We want not even more border funding. A precondition for passing this is
Again, it's so funny how there are no leftists in this call.
Commitment from the Biden administration to enforce existing laws, including Remain in Mexico. Tangible evidence as table stakes.
How do you pass a law telling people to enforce the law that already exists? What you have to do is you have to replace the people that are committing treason. That's what's going on here. They are refusing to enforce the law that exists. That's called treason.
Talking about any further funding to Ukraine. And then on the funding to Ukraine, it's metered out over time, and it is completely discretionary at the level of the U.S. Commander-in-Chief, the U.S. President, such that they know that if it's metered out over time, right, it's not going to go out, and President Trump is able to then be at the table to negotiate an end to this, he can use the withholding of those funds as one of the levers in what will be a complex negotiation.
Skipping forward to where they talk about the next president. Democrats are too ideologically possessed to think reasonably once they hear the word Trump. Again, we're dealing with deranged people whose mental faculties have been robbed from them by Marxism.
Or more than 10 in the current climate on this bill, then we're never going to get to that moment because they can get what they want more cheaply from them. And that's why that's what these guys are doing.
There's both a procedural answer and a substantive answer to your question. To Mike's point, the procedural answer is that you can't even force the debate that you're suggesting unless some of these 18 Republicans flip and join with the majority of the conference. So long as they're willing to end debate with the Democrats, which is what tonight's vote is, you don't even get an opportunity to present this to the conference, to force amendment votes and so forth. So really, this is why the vote tonight is so important, is you're just trying to give some space to breathe for the argument that we're making. Now, substantively, do I think they accept the argument? I actually don't think that they do, Vivek. And the reason is, unfortunately, quite simple. There is a subset of the Republican conference that is terrified that Donald Trump actually means what he says, and that when he is elected president in January of 2025 and takes office, he will enforce some measure of diplomacy and bring the war to a rapid close. I actually think the intentional thing here is to handcuff him as much as possible. And I think I made this observation before you joined, Vivek, but I'll repeat it because it's important. The Washington Post is openly reporting administration officials leaking that they want to handcuff the next president. The Biden people are terrified that Donald Trump will win and that he will not pursue Biden's foreign policy or the neocon foreign.
That's incredibly interesting. That's incredibly interesting. They're already calculating how to sabotage him.
Policy on Ukraine. They are trying to constrain him. Substantively, I don't think they would take the deal because they want to do the thing that we're terrified they're doing.
They're trying to mitigate risk, except the risk is the opposite of what it actually is because they're doing damage to America.
Right. And so that's why I think it's
They're trying to hedge in favor of damaging America no matter what. That's insane.
at least worth smoking that out so everybody can see it in plain sight. And you'll have to sort of publicly expose the 18 Republicans rather than doing it procedurally with, how the mechanics work in the Senate. But that's the point I was making, JD, is with respect to both the border, where part of what they're doing, to borrow Elon's language, is they're importing votes and stopping and want to stop the export of votes. That explains what's happening in the southern border debate. And here, with respect to Ukraine, it is about actually constraint the degree
Democrats are openly corrupt.
of freedom that Donald Trump will have as the next president
Openly.
in negotiating an end to this war. And so when you see that it's actually each of these seemingly separate and otherwise inexplicable policies, like how could this be the policy in our southern
They're unabashedly hating morality. That's who they are.
border? How could this actually be the position that we're taking to Ukraine to fork over more money without an iota of accountability for the $100 billion that we've already sent? It's actually all explained through, I think, a simple version of politics, not Republican versus Democrat politics, non-Trump versus Trump politics in Washington, D.C., to say that how do we, A, minimize the chance that he's elected president? That's what the border policies are about. And how do we actually ensure that the degrees of freedom, if elected, are as constrained as they possibly can be before he assumes office? And I think that when you just try that filter on, right, as like a lens, let's just say it's like a different lens with like a different...
There are some really disturbed, sick people that hate America.
filter. To me, at least, that seems like a more parsimonious explanation.
I genuinely wonder in my heart and soul what happened to them. Like, what happened to a human to make them want to destroy the greatest thing humanity has ever created?
Of what's happening. And if that is correct, right, it sounds rather, conspiratorial and far-fetched to somebody who's hearing it for the first time, but it actually just makes sense if you look at why exactly they're operating the way they are. It's advancing a political incentive. Then I think the question is, how do you most effectively at least smoke that out so everybody can see it, actually name that problem? And then I think it becomes very difficult for those 18 Republicans to continue to hold on to their position, which was far less grounded in anything else other than being terrified of really changing the world order after, Trump is able to negotiate an end to this war.
Vivek, let me quick clarify this, okay?
Go ahead, Ron.
And Mike laid it out, but just very simply, when we entered this thing, McConnell, his top priority was funding for Ukraine. But public opinion and the very strong political rhetoric that we ought to secure our own border before we spend $60 billion to secure Ukraine's was effective. And so McConnell finally switched and said, okay, we got to let Democrats know we're serious. We're going to defeat cloture on this bill, and we're going to demand that border security is going to be attached to funding for Ukraine. Then secret negotiations occurred on an issue that the public supports Republicans on, and we end up with this monstrosity of a bill. It's an immigration bill. It's not a border security bill. But during that time frame, we repeatedly talked about making Ukraine funding contingent on border metrics, just like performance measurements in business, right? As the border was secured, you'd get $5 billion a month. I mean, we had it all.
So stupid. It's ridiculous. We'll give you money to send to another country if you just enforce the laws that exist to protect our own country.
Laid out, had a proposal. It had a great deal of support in our conference, but what
Talking about spineless, talking about soy.
Mike pointed out is, unbeknownst to us at the time, McConnell told Langford that's not even on the table. He, on his own, using his own authority, without telling the conference, even though he knew the conference supported tying border security or Ukraine funding to actually securing the border, McConnell just took that off the table. And that moment of leverage we had, where we could use Biden's desire for Ukraine funding to actually force him to use his executive authority to secure the border, has been lost. And that is why so many of us are speaking out against McConnell. It was such a breach of his leadership position, and is such a, just a horrible thing to do to Americans who want a secure border. But that's where we're at. So again, I think it has been smoked out. Now the action moves.
And there are Americans that don't want to secure a border. Think about that. That's ridiculous.
The House, and I've been talking to the Speaker and to Chairman Jordan. We need the House to step up the plate and say that no, you're not going to get any funding for Ukraine until we secure our border. They've got to stand strong, and most of the messaging now most of the public pressure has to be directed toward the House.
So, Ron, I want to jump in and go back to something you and Elon were discussing earlier, just because I think it gets to the strategy of where do we go from here in Ukraine. And, it's always challenging to psychoanalyze people, but I think much of what is going on with Ukraine policy is you're trying to insulate neocons and liberal internationalists in the Biden administration from actually dealing with the consequences of their decisions. And so if you just go back to sort of 8, 9, 10 months ago, the consensus in the Biden administration, I spoke about this privately with Secretary Blinken, was we are going to put the Russians all the way back to the 1991 borders. The counteroffensive is going to be wildly successful, and that's what we're trying to do. Of course, that didn't pan out. So now what is their argument for the strategy? The argument for the strategy is that if we throw enough money and resources and weapons at Ukraine, they will somehow reach a point where the Russians are tired of fighting and will come to the negotiating table. And of course, we've learned pretty conclusively that the Russians were at the negotiating table in April of 2022.
Right. We learned that when Tucker, like a hero, showed us all how corrupt our government was when he interviewed Putin.
When Blinken and Boris Johnson refused to negotiate with them.
Right.
So
Exactly.
We are witnessing the complete collapse of America's strategic capacity in the defense world. I mean,
That's one way of putting it. The complete collapse of America's strategic capacity. Yeah.
Can you imagine in World War II?
Half our country can't think. Half our country thinks logic and reason are oppressive.
We're at the point of negative returns with money spent on Ukraine.
Correct. Yes, correct. America is becoming less powerful every single week.
I am sort of
Good
okay
point.
with saying no to both Ukraine, yes to the border. I recognize that we have to have some negotiation.
America is not getting more powerful right now. Our dollar's getting weaker. We're depleting our resources. Even if our resources are tremendous and near infinite, we're still depleting them. And we're showing the world that we're incompetent and foolish.
Here, but we really have to be honest about how insane this policy is and completely divorced from strategic capacity. If your explicit strategy is wait Vladimir Putin out until he comes to the negotiating table, when you are outmatched in manpower and weaponry, you're clinically insane.
Say, JD, let me add one more piece of information, because I was chairman of the European Subcommittee on Foreign Relations, or ranking member for...
Democrats are clinically insane, though. That's a hallmark of leftism. That's a hallmark of Marxism, is rejecting and demonizing, perverting, and denying all aspects of objective reality, being reason, rationality, logic. Again, they view those things as oppressive. They view those things as discriminatory. They think feelings can win wars. This is where we are in 2024.
Period of 10 years. So I've been over to Ukraine a lot. I was the only member of Congress that went to Zelensky's inauguration. I returned a few months later with Senator Murphy and talked to Zelensky. At that point in time, Zelensky wanted to do a peace agreement with Putin. This was when...
Oh my gosh, dude. And then the CIA came in and said, nope, sorry.
Already illegally annexed Crimea and was in firm control of eastern Ukraine. He knew at the time there was no way he was going to dislodge Putin. He knew it wouldn't be popular, but he wanted to do a peace agreement. His position's even worse right now. So I just point that out, that Zelensky wanted peace. I don't think, again, I think it's just tragic that the U.S. is using Ukraine as the pawns in their proxy war with Russia, and Ukraine is being destroyed as a result of that.
Can I just add something to that? I'm old enough to remember when the Senate and Congress passed the first 150
Well, I thought he was going to say we're in control of the country.
a negotiation with the Russians.
But they wouldn't settle for any of this because they hate reality fundamentally.
I guess my question for all of you senators is, could we get a real investigation, like some congressional oversight, a congressional investigation of what exactly happened in that sort of March, April period at the beginning of the war?
That would be like investigating the tip of the iceberg, the very tip of corruption. It goes all the way back to 2020 and into 2016, guys. We're dealing with insane lunatics who hate America.
Where, again, they had a draft agreement in Istanbul, and then Boris Johnson came in, and the Ukrainians walked away. I mean, I would love for the Congress to be able to ask real questions of the administration in its oversight capacity, asking, what was your involvement in sabotaging that deal?
Yeah, David, so obviously I support congressional oversight, but we have to be honest here about how many of our colleagues seem dead set against real oversight.
How many of our colleagues seem opposed to logic itself?
And, Ron John, I'm very curious to your sort of take on this, because I've had a number of
Guys, when you care about the truth, there's not that many ways to screw up. I'm going to be honest. I mean, there's micro ways to mess up, but you're not going to do the opposite of what makes sense very often if you care about what's true. Democrats don't actually care about what's true because what's true to them is oppressive. They want to be victims so they can call themselves good people. That's what it is.
conversations with colleagues, with Department of Defense officials, and it's really weird to me how they simultaneously say, we know where all the money is going, and also we refuse to do any independent oversight. You know, if they know all the money is going, then they might as well just accede to the independent oversight, because it would make people like me much more, at least sympathetic to the fact that we knew where our resources were going, even if I don't agree that they should be going there in the first place. But I'm just curious, Ron, why are they so resistant to this? We've tried to do it. We've tried to force amendment votes. They are dead set against oversight. I don't get it.
Well, they don't want to admit they're wrong.
Exactly.
I think an awful big push of this administration is just get Ukraine past the election. House Republicans would have to be doing the oversight. I'll use COVID as an example. Nobody wants to admit what a miserable failure our response was to COVID.
As a matter of fact, I'll go further than that. They are infuriated by the current consensus that the left was tyrannical. They are enraged that that is their reputation, and that's the way people look at them. And that is the way people look at them overwhelmingly. People know, even in liberal cities, that it was a disaster, horrible management of every single policy, and that the people in charge were mentally devoid of, honestly, the character of America when it comes to liberty and freedom and being able to move around. They're enraged just being seen as frauds on that. And again, they fear nothing as much as being revealed as incoherent, because then once people look at them that way, there's no way to win those people back over, because they're not persuasive. They can't debate their ideas. They can't engage in the free marketplace of thought. All they have is demonization.
Pushed on their constituents. They did videos recommending might have killed some of their constituents. And the same dynamic is occurring here with Ukraine. Nobody wants to admit that we completely wasted over $110 billion. So the way you don't have to admit failure is you keep pushing more money, pretending.
You keep undermining America. You keep poking holes in the ship, letting in more water. That's what you do, according to Marx.
That it's a success. So again, I think it's just that basic human tendency. Nobody wants to admit they were wrong. And again, one of the ways you do it is
that's not the way intelligent people operate. Elon Musk doesn't operate that way. He admits when he's wrong. The people that work for him admit when they're wrong, because they are serving an objective truth. That's the beauty of an objective reality.
I mean, again, no one is even proposing that victory is the objective here. No one's claiming that we're going to win.
And the Putin interview with Tucker really put the nail in the coffin on that conversation. No one believes that that's the case now. We all know that the left was lying. I was going to say to pretend as though we're on the same team, but we're not on the same team as these people. The left has been openly lying to everyone, and they're doing it in accordance with their Marxist ideology. As a matter of fact, Russia taking Ukraine would be way less of a strategic blow than we've already dealt ourselves with pushing Russia into the arms of China and devaluing the dollar. So it's already completely incoherent.
The Ukrainians are losing an ammunition war. We can't produce enough to solve that problem for them in any reasonable time frame. And moreover, they're out of soldiers. There's videos on Twitter that I'll post in this room of Ukrainian men being literally rounded up off the street. I read a case of a guy in his 50s went out to get a haircut, and he was impressed into service, and in the next week he ended up in the front lines in Ukraine. This is what's happening right now, is people are being rounded up off the streets.
That's a crime. That is a global crime.
To fight in a losing war, to keep it going for just a few more days or weeks or months, so that the people who up to this point don't have to
That's demonic.
take any accountability.
Can you imagine you go outside to your mailbox and then they pick you up in a van and say, hey, you're going to the front lines? Are you kidding me? To fight Putin in an impossible war?
David.
And the proxy war is destroying Ukraine. This isn't for the benefit of the Ukrainian people. They are being destroyed in this process. So
Most Ukrainians want to join Russia.
we as Americans, listen, we are the good guys. I have no doubt about that. But we are far from perfect. And what we don't do oversight, but we don't retrospectively take a look at what our actions actually resulted in, because we really don't want to own up to the reality of that situation.
This is a Republican senator right here. Something you can't ignore, something I'm thinking about as I'm listening to this, is one positive side effect of the woke mind virus degeneracy is it's made all the Republicans into really thinking, caring humans that employ logic and reason rather than sit in their, staunch inflexibility. The left has become completely too insane to play with. They're like that kid that's tweaking on the playground. You can't even communicate with them. They're just completely insane. They're off in their own world. Republicans are evolving into something more than just this old school Republican existence. And I think that's really, really positive. I mean, what you're hearing now is impressive.
Well, and to the point about destroying Ukraine, Ron.
And again, they're swamping every single senator and congressman that is not in this call and putting them to shame, quite frankly, with the quality nature of this dialogue. You think AOC would be a part of this? You think AOC would be capable of being part of this? The climate is racist. Oh my gosh, in Chicago, we're going to be underwater. Shut up, bitch. No one wants to hear that bullshit.
I hate when people don't talk about unintended consequences in war. Like, what does it do to your country? What would it do to America if we took 4 million prime age men and sucked them out of America and threw them into space? It would radically transform our politics. It would radically transform our economy. It would completely decimate, a generation.
It's an amazing point. Of course, the radical left does want to do that because they are opposed to masculinity. And they're trying to do that. They're just trying to demasculate and demonize men into servitude of femme-centric systems, as well as cripple men into paralysis, worried that they're going to transgress against the environment or feminism if they dare pursue their masculine, toxic ambition.
Of young people. So just in moral terms, it's a disaster. And no one's talking about it. Everybody's acting like the Ukrainians are gung-ho to fight. The data doesn't suggest that.
No, I mean, all the Ukrainians who are gung-ho to fight volunteered in the first year of the war. Now they're rounding people up off the streets. It has no real chance of changing the outcome of the war here. I mean, it's very clear that the Russians are dominant. They have a lot more soldiers. They have a lot more weapons. They have a lot more artillery. And they're going to win the war. It's just a matter of time now. But Zelensky and Biden both have the same incentive, which is to keep this thing going as long as possible so they don't have to acknowledge the failure of their policy.
Exactly. Well, they will acknowledge it eventually. And the radical left has no care whatsoever for the lives being lost at all. They're willing to sacrifice anything at the feet of their woke ideological god, being something like unmitigated resentment for reality itself. I think I'll end the video by saying it's remarkable that Elon Musk is having this conversation with these people for all the reasons I've listed throughout this video, and that radical leftists are enraged that the most competent man who embodies all the ways that they are failures and demonize him and attack him for the fact that they are failures in comparison to him, that he is spearheading this conversation and changing the global consciousness in a way similar to what Tucker was able to do with Putin. That changed the global consciousness of the conflict, and this is going to change it as well, because there's no way to ignore it, and they can't censor it because it's on X. 50 to 150 times more people will watch this than watch CNN or MSNBC, and they don't want that. Leftists wish that competence would be shielded, same reason they're demonizing masculinity, and it's the reason they hate Elon Musk. And so this is doing manifold damage to the woke ideology. Just engaging in logic and reason and planning and strategy itself does damage to woke Marxism because of its competence. Subscribe to the channel, guys. Follow me on X. Let's go.